Hi, and welcome to this special program about Persian New Year, Norooz, that is sponsored by Center for Iranian Diaspora Study at San Francisco State University. I am Nader Mehravari. I'll be your host in a sequence of short videos about preparing ourselves for Persian New Year. Uh, this program will be a little different than other programs that you might have seen or heard about or participated in about Norooz and Persian New Year, in the sense that we're also going to talk about food, the type of food that's prepared and served before, at, and after the New Year. So that's why we call this a food-based program. We also talk about history, language, where things came from, and traditions. Uh, as most of you know, Norooz in Persian language means new day. It's a mechanism for Persianate societies to celebrate the coming and renewal of spring. It's been celebrated for over 3,000 years. Depending on what historians you talk to, they will tell you different stories about where it came from. It is clearly rooted in the traditions of the Zoroastrian faith, one of the oldest continuously practiced faiths in the world. It's also described in the famous Shahnameh by Ferdowsi, the famous Iranian historical epic that Shahnameh talks about, that he started during the kingdom of Jamshid, prehistorical Iranian history. It's about a month worth of preparation and activities. We will have different segments to tell you what Iranian people do before the New Year's, what happens at the New Year's, and eventually what happens for about 2 weeks after the New Year's. And I hope you join us in the future segments. Thank you. Oh, hi. In a previous segment of this special Norooz program, I told you about that we're going to tell you about some of the things Persian society people do in order to get ready for the New Year's. And one of those things is to clean the house. In Persian language, it is referred to as khane tekani. If you literally translate that, it means shaking the house, which should tell you this is not your normal weekly house cleaning. This is a major house cleaning, that you clean the inside, you clean the outside, you clean all the things that hasn't been cleaned for an entire year, your carpets, under the carpets. You get everybody in the house involved, the younger ones, men, women, husband, wives, friends, neighbors, etc. If we talk to some of the historians, they tell us some information about where this tradition comes from. The ones that I like the best, is that ancient Iranians believed that sometime between 5 to 10 years before New Year's, the souls of their deceased families would come and visit them. And therefore, they said, we need to make sure our house is very clean when our ancestors' souls come and visit. And that's where the tradition comes from. One of the major things that the people do is to clean their Persian carpets. They usually take it out, they wash it, or do other things with it. So let's go outside and take a look about the concept of carpet beating. So carpet is one of those things that maybe doesn't get really clean on a weekly or monthly basis. So for khane tekani, in preparation for Norooz, people take their carpets out and they beat it using one of those really traditional brooms. Now, you may not have one of these traditional brooms at home, so just get your tennis racket out and get all the dust out. Now, when you do this for an entire day, this is really gets tiring. So Iranians usually take a rest. And of course, while you're resting, you got to drink some tea. So in Iranian houses, there's always tea brewing. And it's the best time to have some tea after you've done some carpet beating. Hi. As you can tell, I'm playing with the tag on my new clothes. Yeah, I just bought some new clothes. Um, Buying new clothes is another one of those preparation activities for Persian New Year. Um, for Norooz, uh, the idea is for people to buy at least one piece of new clothes and have it ready to put on at the time of the spring equinox. When we talk to the historians, they tell us different stories about where this tradition comes from. Uh, the one that I really like is the idea that when us as humans look outside and we see that Mother Nature is changing her clothes from the dark gray colors of winter to green and blossomy colors of spring, we as humans also like to change our clothes to emphasize that concept of spring renewal. It's a fun thing for kids because we take them shopping. Everybody gets involved. Other aspects of this tradition involves those families who might have had a death in the family over the last 12 months, who've been wearing dark and black clothes for mourning purposes. This might be an opportunity for them, for at least for one day, to wear something different. So we've talked about two preparations for Norooz. Last segment, we talked about Khana Tekoni, spring cleaning, and we talked about buying new clothes. There are other activities that takes place about the same time. One of the things people will see in the streets, sudden appearance of some magical creatures, such as Amu Norooz and Nana Sarma, who go around the streets and dance and play music and announce the fact that spring is coming. So growing Sabzeh, or sprouting grains, is yet another traditional preparatory activity for Norooz and Persian New Year. When we talk to the historians, they tell us there are different stories about where this tradition came from. The one that I particularly like is associated with story from Shahnameh, the famous Persian epic that, as I had mentioned in our previous segment, Norooz was created by King Jamshid after he defeated what is referred to as a deadly winter, a very bad winter. He was successful in surviving and having his people survive that very bad winter. People noticed that after that event, dead wood started growing green shoots. And that's one story about where the tradition of growing Sabzeh for New Year's has come from. So typically about 2 weeks before New Year's, you select your favorite seed. It could be lentils. It could be wheat. It could be mung beans. Or it could be barley. The process is very easy. You soak your seeds in plenty of water. On the first time, you may have to massage them a little bit so they all get well wet. And you soak them for about 3 to 4 days, depending how fresh your seeds are, how good your seeds are, or whether you're doing lentils or mung beans or wheat. They may take 3 or 4 or 5 days of soaking before you start seeing some shoots coming out of them. So I'm going to show you another batch that I started about 6 days ago. And you see there are small green shoots coming out of this collection of lentils. The moment you see shoots coming out, you dump the extra water and you cover them with a piece of cheesecloth or a couple of layers of paper towels, and you keep them damp. You may have to keep them, put some water on a daily basis. After 3 or 4 days, they start growing. And this one I started 2 weeks ago, and right now it's perfect, and it's the right height to be put on a half-seen table that we'll talk about in a future segment. Just warning, if you are going to grow wheat, which is, by the way, this is, make sure you get unpelted wheat. So it has all the parts of the wheat in it. It's not the type of wheat you use to make, for example, halim. And that's about growing sabzeh in preparation for Persian New Year. Yeah, as you might be able to guess, I'm getting ready to go outside, and it's cold outside a little bit. Yes, is Chaharshanbeh Soori, the eve of the last Wednesday of the Persian calendar year. It's the night that we go outside, we put a few small bonfires, and we jump over them. That is the tradition of Chaharshanbeh Soori, one of the most preparatory activities for Norooz, particularly for the kids who get really, really excited about this tradition. So where does this tradition comes from? Again, there are different historical stories about where this tradition comes from. The one that I particularly like, because there's a lot of research about it, is that this tradition has been going on since sometime between 2nd and 3rd millennium before Common Era. During the Zoroastrian has a lot of festivals. One of the festivals was called Fravardin, during which they thought a lot about their deceased ancestors. And they thought that about 5 to 10 days before New Year's, they will come and visit them. So one of the things they did was they set up these small bonfires to make sure the ancestors would find their houses. So this is one of the stories of where the tradition comes from. Today, we celebrate on the eve of the last Wednesday of the year. So sometime between 3rd and 7th century Common Era, when calendars were formalized, the date of this tradition was assigned to the eve of the last Wednesday of the year. And why Wednesday, but not some other day in the week? One historical information that we have is after the Arab conquest of Persia, some Arabs, ancient Arabs, didn't like the day Wednesday because they thought it was an evil day. And therefore, the night before, they would create these bonfires to force the evil to go out. And that's why the tradition, or why we do it on the eve of the last Wednesday of the year. So typically, the tradition was that people will go out in the desert and will gather what in Farsi we call bote, which is basically dry pieces of wood, bring it home, make an odd number of small bonfires, 1, 3, 5, or 7. The 7 comes from the fact that ancient Persians thought that number 7 was lucky. And as soon as it got dark, we would set them on fire and people would jump over them. These are small fires, not huge ones. They would burn very quickly. Often families in the same streets would get together and put together their bote to have a bigger fire. At the same night, there are many other traditions that takes place. For example, when the fires are done, typically unmarried individuals will go and collect the ashes and will take them out and throw them away. And when they would come back, they would knock on the door to let themselves in. And people said, "Who's there?" And they would say, "It's me. Where are you coming from?" "I'm coming from a wedding." "What are you bringing?" "Happiness." And then they will let him in. There are other traditions that takes place on the same night. One is called Ashok Zani, where people, particularly youngsters, will go and grab a pot and a spoon, and they will go outside and cover themselves, and they would pretend to be one of these souls of dead ancestors, and they would ask for goodies to be given to them. And from a food perspective, the primary snack for Chaharshanbeh Soori is an ajil. Ajil in Persian means mixed nut and fruit. This Chaharshanbeh, there are many different ajils in Persian cookery. Chaharshanbeh Soori ajil is a non-salted ajil where typically 7 different nuts and fruits are mixed together, and it's a primary snack for that night. And when the kids come for Ashok Zani, they give them some of this food. There are a few other things that takes place. One of them is breaking kuze, breaking clay pots. If you had put one of these clay pots outside when you were jumping over the fire, the story is that the evil will go inside the kuze while you were jumping, and when you're all done, you would take it and you break it to kill the evil forces. And then there are a few other things that goes on that's related to fortune telling and wishing people good luck in the coming year. And something that they used to do in villages, since in villages the houses were only one floor, the kids will go on the floor, on the top, they will grab a scarf and hanging by the front door, and the people would see the scarf and would hang something, fruit or some goodies to them, and the kids would pull them up. That was called shalandazi, throwing scarves. And there are many other traditions on Chaharshanbeh Soori. So we just finished jumping over the fires outdoor. It was really quite fun. We had some people who did spoon hitting, and we gave them some of the ajil that we had. But now it's time to sit down and have the formal Chaharshanbeh Soori dinner. So depending where you are in Iran, what people eat on Chaharshanbeh Soori dinner differs greatly. But there are 2 items that are most common, regardless of where you are or what region you are in Iran. One of them is ash reshteh, which is probably the most famous type of ash. It's a very thick ash that has Persian noodles in it, and it's decorated on top with kashk, which is a dairy product, fried onions, and butter and mint. And the other one that it's rarely made, it's a special complicated rice dish, which is called 7 rice dish. because it's a compilation of 7 different Persian polos. It's the shirin polo, the sweet rice. It's havich polo, the rice with carrots. Reshte polo is the rice with noodles. Zeresh polo, which is the rice with barberries. Sabzeh polo, which is the rice with herbs. Lubia polo, which is the rice with tomatoes and green beans. And finally, adas polo, which is the rice with lentils. This is called the 7 rice dish, specialty for Chaharshanbeh Soori. It's not made very often, but it's a very special dish. And of course, there are other things that goes along with the meal, which is tradition for each family differs. There is some kind of a borani. This is esfanaj, spinach borani. There is Shirazi salad. They're probably one of the most famous salads in Persian cookery. And then both asher reshte and the rice are meatless, and sometimes there is a khoresh. This is a yellow split pea khoresh with lamb. And of course, on any Persian meal table, you have sabzeh khordan, which is fresh herbs, and some flat bread. And here I also have one of my favorite cuckoos, which is the potato cuckoo. So this is the official formal family dinner after having jumped outside over the fires. So I'm now ready to eat. Okay, so we've talked about several traditions that takes place before the actual New Year. The actual New Year takes place on the exact moment of the Persian, on the spring equinox. It's sometime between March 20th and 21st. It varies every year depending on exactly when the spring equinox takes place. For this event, families put together a spread, which is called hafsin, sofre hafsin, the spread of 7 S's. This is a traditional spread that gets put in people's houses, and a few minutes or maybe half an hour before the moment of spring equinox, everybody gathers around this spread. So let's talk about what goes on in this spread. Clearly, you will see a large collection of fruit. You see the type of ajil that was used in Chaharshanbeh Soori evening. If there is some left, we put it on the hafsin table. Lots of sweets, candies, including Persian gas. But the centerpiece of the spread is called hafsin. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In Persian language, 7 is haft. 7 food items that their Persian word starts with the Persian letter se. That sounds like an S. So there is apple, there is greens or sabzeh, there is garlic. In Farsi, in Persian, is seer. There is sumak, which is the berry of the sumak plant. There is vinegar, which in Persian is serke. And then there is this food item called samanu, which is a sweet dish made from wheat germs. And then the last item in Persian is called senjed, which is the fruit of the Russian olive tree. So these are the 7 food items whose Persian name starts with letter S, and that's why it's called hafsin, 7 S's spread. There are other things on the table. Clearly, you will see a mirror to signify the sky and the openness. There is the Sabzeh that has been growing for the last couple of weeks to signify rejuvenation and start of the spring. In some houses, you will see a bowl of water with an orange floating in it, and that's supposed to signify the world turning around. In some houses, you will see a small mirror with an egg on it. That's the one that I remember from my childhood as a funny story. The story that I was told when I was a kid about that was that half of the year, the earth is held on one hand of a giant, and at the new year, he throws it to the other hand. And at that moment, this egg will shake. So we used to sit at the table and see when the egg would shake. There is, again, lots of different sweets to signify that we are hoping for a sweet coming year. And there's always some book of religious book or some saying by famous Iranian poets or authors. And Shahnameh is one of those books that often is present on the Hafsin table. So typically right before the spring equinox, it could be in the middle of the night, people in the house gather around the Hafsin and wait for the new year to begin. At that point, everybody was sitting around the table, gather, hug themselves, give each other kisses, and maybe the elders in the family give AD presents to the younger ones in the house. The table usually stays around for the next 13 days, and we'll talk about what happens in the next 2 weeks after the beginning of the new year. Okay, so time again to talk about some of the food-related topics related to Persian New Year. So this is a typical primary main meal for the New Year's itself. People either have it the night before or the night after, sometimes for lunch, sometimes for dinner, but it's a huge primary dish to celebrate Persian New Year, Norooz. Typically, again, like many other Persian meals, depending on where you are in Iran, you will find different things on the table. But probably the centerpiece of a Norooz dinner table is this dish, which is Sabzeh polo, which is rice with fresh herbs, accompanied with Sabzeh kuku, which is a egg-centered dish with herbs and fried sauteed fish. So this is primarily, you will find this on any Persian New Year meals with some variations. And then there are other things that goes along with the meal, depending on the family's preferences. Of course, there is tahdig that came out of the bottom of the pot of the Sabzeh polo. This will disappear the quickest. People will fight over it. And then there are a few other dishes. This is kashkabadam jun, which is fried and cooked eggplants with cash and butter and mint and fried onions. And this is a stewed chicken. Since most of this rice, it has no meat in it, those who like to have extra meat with it can serve themselves some stewed chicken. And then, of course, there is sabzi khordan, the green herbs. There's flat bread. There's some kind of borani here. We have mastah khiyar, which is cucumber and yogurt. And there's always extra pieces of sabzi kuku because that's a good thing to have, particularly for leftovers. And by the way, that's a really good leftovers to keep for the Sizdah Bedar picnic. So we've had several video segments about traditions of things that happens before the New Year. And in our most recent segment, we talked about the Hafseen table and the exact moment of the New Year at the spring equinox. So now what happens after the New Year's? So one of the most important traditions is after the New Year's, in days after New Year's, people start going out and visiting friends and family. They usually go as a household to other people's houses and spend a couple of hours visiting and wishing them New Year's. So who visits whom in what order? That's somewhat important. Typically in the early days after New Year, the younger members of the family go and visit the elders. Maybe they go visit their grandparents on both sides, the uncles and aunts. And as days goes on, maybe they go and visit their sisters and brothers' houses, etc. Eventually, after 6 or 7 days, all family members and friends have gone to each other's houses and have visited. So what happens in some of these visits? Typically, when you visit somebody's house for Deed-o-bazdeed is a Persian term for these visits after the New Year. The moment you walk into the house, you're welcome. You've taken to the part of the house that they have guests, and you will notice that typically there is a table full of fruit and lots of sweets, and typically they immediately serve you some tea, and then they invite you to enjoy some of the sweet and some of the fruit, and then conversation goes on. And typically Iranians' habits are that they really want you, the people in the house want the visitors to eat some of the goodies. So they encourage them. They actually go and pick a plate and they put a few sample of the sweets on a plate and they put it in front of the guests to further encourage them to eat the sweets. And this is part of the Ta'aruf tradition in Persian culture, where we sort of ask each other, well, you go first, I go first, you should have some more, yes, I will have some more. That's a concept of Ta'aruf. And if you're visiting someone that they really, really like you and they really want you to eat, for example, an orange, they may even go and start peeling it for you. One of the ways that they do that is, I'm going to demonstrate to you. They cut the orange this way, and then they don't completely peel it. They just take some of the peel off of the orange, and then to make it pretty, they fold the bottom like this, and then they open it, and then they put it in front of the guests. Now they made it really, really easy for them to eat the fruit. Other traditions involved with Deed-o-bazdeed is you do go and visit family members who might have had a death in a family during the past 12 months. And this time when you see them, instead of reminding them about the passing of their family member, you actually talk about a different subject as the new year has begun. It's an important tradition. Also, when kids visit some of the elders, it's an opportunity for the elders that the kids are visiting to give kids some AD, some New Year's presents that are typically could be a fresh piece of money or some coins or small presents. Typically are not huge presents. So kids also like to go on these visits because there's an opportunity to get gifts. And this process continues for the next 12 days. And then something special happens on the 13th day of the new year that we talk about in the next segment. Okay, it's the 13th day of the Persian New Year. And today typically is the last day of the overall celebration of Norooz. It's a day that everybody packs lots of food and tea and other goodies and take their carpet and set up and go out in the outside to have a day-long picnic. It's not your typical picnic. It's not just 1 or 2 hours. It's typically all day. In fact, this is very simple setup. A lot of people take um, material to sleep, take a nap after lunch. They may take a samovar or take a water pipe to enjoy themselves for all day, and to bring games and everything. Now, again, there are historical information about the history of this day. If you read the Shahnameh, the Persian um, historical epic story, it tells us that ancient Iranians, um, after the New Year's, they celebrated every day after Nowruz for one of the 12 months of the year. And then on the 13th day, they went out and enjoyed themselves outside. Um, in the Zoroastrian uh, faith, there's a story that uh, this is the celebration of uh, drought over the, the, the rain day. And they go out and celebrate, wishing for lots of rain in the spring. And ancient Persian also thought that number 13 was not a lucky day, so we might as well go out and enjoy ourselves and end the New Year preparation and celebration in a joyous way. So this is called Sizdah Bedar. Sizdah Bedar, if you translate it uh, just word by word, means kicking out 13, is basically having a major picnic outdoors on the 13th day of the Persian New Year. I hope you've enjoyed this series of small video segments, and I wish you a very happy Persian New Year.